You ever stash a memory so deep you figure it'll never claw its way back, only to feel it tap you on the shoulder when the house is quiet? Name's Tom Rayburn, Sergeant Rayburn, back when the harsh fluorescence of Garland PD's homicide bullpen were my sunrise and sunset. 41 years of chalk outlines, chain of custody tags, and the thin, flickering hopes of next of kin taught me how to shelve ghosts, evidence boxed, statements notarized, cold files padlocked behind steel cabinetry. Then, one drizzly Tuesday last fall, I pressed play on a dusty VHS and the latch on one of those cabinets snapped wide open. Before we crack that door together, do me a small favor, will you? If anything in the next breath stirs a question about loyalty, truth, or the price tag on silence, give that thumbs up a nudge, jot a thought down below, maybe ride along with the subscribe button. Every little ping tells the almighty algorithm this old cop's voice still belongs on the beat. All right, file that under professional courtesy and let's roll tape. Backtrack with me to a Texas night so hot the air itself felt combustible. Summer of '73, midnight watch. Dispatch calls a possible 10 to 54 at the Royal Crest Motel off Jupiter Road, one of those joints where neon dies letter by letter. Jimmy Cale and I answer, 11 minutes out. Jimmy, partner, best friend, the man who once dragged me out of a crossfire alley on Mercer Street. When we step into room 109, I taste cordite before I see the body. Carl Dennett, small-timer with big ambitions, is wedged between a rattling AC unit and a toppled ice bucket, single-round center mass. Jimmy's revolver smokes, his pulse steady as a metronome. He says Dennett pulled a blade. I don't see one. I do see terror in Jimmy's eyes, then something harder to forgive, relief. In that split second the badge and the friendship wage war, and I choose the friend. I craft a report that calls it justifiable, restring the narrative, prune witness statements, misplace a bloodied shirt. We walk away, and I tell myself we saved Jimmy's sister, saved the paperwork, saved the town one more nightmare. Funny thing about anything saved, interest comes due. Years tumble by. Jimmy and I retire by matching tackle boxes, swap war stories nobody else wants to hear. My daughter Alice grows from pigtail tornado to social worker crusader, always preaching redemption. One June afternoon she brings a man to Sunday supper, salt and pepper hair, that same dangerously charming grin I once trusted behind me while clearing doors. Jimmy. The universe, it seems, loves a circle. I keep quiet, convince myself the past is past, let them marry. Peace doesn't follow, just a dull, grinding silence. Then, cleaning out my garage this January, I find that VHS labeled 93 Department Picnic. Halfway through the tape, rookies flipping burgers, captains laughing, the cameraman wanders into records, pans across an evidence board I'd built for cold case rotations, and pauses just long enough for the lens to drink in a sticky note, see, Dennett, reopen. My heart does a bad drum roll, because the victim on that board wears my daughter's wedding band on his finger, even if she never knew his name. And that's why I'm talking now. I'm 76, lungs wheeze like a busted swamp cooler, and my ledger has red ink left to settle. Stick with me for the next half hour and I'll walk you through the night a good cop crossed a line, the decade I spent pretending the line erased itself, and the moment I learned a covered-up bullet never stops traveling. You want tidy heroes? Click away. You want honest? Stay. By the end, I'm going to ask you one question that might leave you staring at your own ceiling fan tonight. Ready? Let's pop the seal. I grew up on the outskirts of Garland, Texas, where the nights were humid and the stars felt close enough to reach out and touch, and I learned early that hard work was its own reward. My daddy drove a dump truck and my mama cleaned houses, and there was never much room for daydreams. Everything had a price, even a second of peace. I joined the Garland Police Department fresh out of high school in '67, just a kid with more adrenaline than sense, and they sent me straight to patrol. I still remember my first solo shift, The rush of the radio crackling, Unit 5 to 9, respond code 2, the pounding of my heart when I slid into the cruiser seat and tightened my belt. That was the summer Bonnie and Clyde became legend on TV, and I was convinced I'd end up on the front page before I hit 20. Turns out, real life doesn't wear black and white stripes, it's shades of gray, you know. By the time I transferred to homicide in 1971, I'd seen enough bar fights and fender benders to know that death has a way of turning every bystander into a witness and every witness into a suspect. I was 26, eager, and a little naive, thinking that once you solved the case, you'd get a pat on the back and life would keep moving. To be honest, I didn't reckon with how a body scene sticks to your boots or how a mother's sobs echo long after you've closed the coffin. The coroner taught me to listen to silence between the screams. Veteran detectives showed me how to read a report for the story it tried to hide. I still get goosebumps thinking about that first case I led, a young girl lost to a hit and run, her brand new shoes left by the roadside like a punctuation mark. I vowed then never to let a victim's story be forgotten, even if mine sometimes got lost in the paperwork. Over 35 years on the force, I learned that being a homicide detective isn't about catching bullets. You catch people, you catch secrets, you catch guilt. My days revolved around coffee-stained desks, chain of custody tags, and late-night stakeouts under flickering streetlights. I worked alongside partners who became brothers, saluted captains who'd seen too much, and swapped war stories in dusty briefing rooms where the AC rattled like it was holding its breath. I stayed patient when witnesses clammed up, stubborn when supervisors pushed for quick closures, and quiet when the pain in a family's eyes screamed louder than any siren. Man, it was crazy how the human mind rationalizes the unthinkable, how a bullet through a skull can be justified or a knife in the back can be self-defense on paper. My style was simple: ask the right questions, follow the paper trail, and trust my gut when evidence didn't add up. I carried a notebook everywhere, pocket-sized, dog-eared, full of scrawled notes about license plates, suspicious alibis, and offhand remarks that later became confessions. I'm the kind of cop who believes silence can weigh more than a bullet, who's seen tragedy turn good men into ghosts, and who's never forgotten that every case file represents a life upended. By the time I hung up my badge in 2005, I'd worked hundreds of cases, closed most but carried the rest in my memories. Retirement gave me mornings of quiet reflection, afternoons tinkering in the garage, and evenings watching the sunset bleed over the Texas plains. But no amount of time off the clock can dissolve the ties a homicide detective forges with truth, and with the lies he sometimes tells himself. I can still see the neon sign's last flicker over the Royal Crest Motel that night, the way it sputtered like it was gasping for breath under that heavy Texas sky. It was a sweltering July evening in '73, air so thick you could slice it with a knife, and Jimmy Cale and I were two uniforms rolling up in a cruiser that smelled like stale coffee and brake dust. I was 28, fresh on homicide for 2 years, but that night felt different from any run-of-the-mill disturbance. Dispatch had called it in as a possible 10 to 54, and when you hear that code, officer down, your stomach goes cold, even in that heat. We parked under a lamppost that buzzed louder than a million wasps, the engine idling, and I remember Jimmy poking his head out of the window and saying, "Ready, Rayburn?" His voice was steady, too steady, looking back, and I nodded, shoved my notebook into my back pocket, and stepped into the yellow glow of the parking lot. There were 2 other people there before us, a kid on the sidewalk, slouched over his skateboard like he'd just seen a ghost, and a middle-aged motel clerk behind a bulletproof partition, hands trembling on the glass window. The kid mumbled something about hearing the shot, and the clerk's eyes were bright with fear. I think he thought we'd come to lock him up. But I gave both of them that cool, practiced look. "Stand back, son." "Sir, I need your statement in a minute." Then Jimmy and I made our way through the dingy corridor to room 109, the carpet soaked with the smell of blood and cheap cologne. I flicked on my flashlight and saw Carl Dennett face down, his arms splayed out like he was reaching for something, maybe mercy. The AC unit rattled overhead, a half-empty ice bucket lay on its side, water pooling into the carpet. I felt the hairs on my neck prickle, but I kept my mouth shut, let Jimmy take the lead. He crouched by the body, murmuring into his radio as if calling for backup, though backup wouldn't change what had already been done. Jimmy's eyes caught the gleam of Carl's watch, that wedding band he'd bought for his wife, still spun tight on his finger. I'm telling you, it was haunting. I could hear Carl's laughter from a bar down the street, feel the sting of the whiskey he'd bragged about earlier that day. Jimmy whispered, he owed me, and then, in that split second, he pressed the gun to Carl's temple. I swear I froze, thought I was dreaming. The next thing I knew, the shot rang out inside my own head. When I blinked, Carl was gone, and Jimmy's gun was smoking, his breath coming out in harsh little clouds. I didn't see Carl lunge, didn't see the knife. Jimmy said there was one, but I never found it. All I saw was the man who'd saved my life months before, standing over a dead man, and I felt something give way inside me. Down the hall, the kid was crying out, and the clerk was yelling that someone needed to help. I forced myself to move, knees aching, and I pulled Jimmy back, soft voicing, "We'll handle this, just like we trained." I snapped on latex gloves and started gathering evidence, tucking away the bullet casing, bending the story to fit the report, justifiable force, threat neutralized, no witnesses beyond 2 spooked civilians. I coached the kid to remember only the sirens, convinced the clerk the camera in the lobby was malfunctioning. We staged the scene so clean not a drop of doubt would stain the paperwork. All the while, Jimmy stood in the doorway, eyes hollow, like he'd lost more than a friend that night. And in that hallway, the clack of my boots on the peeling floor tiles echoed louder than any confession. I still get goosebumps thinking about it, the way loyalty can turn the badge on its head, the way a friend's survival can cost another man his life. That night set everything in motion, the whispers in precinct back halls, the promise I made to Jimmy under that humming neon, and the debt I thought I'd paid in full. But debts, I learned, have a habit of coming due when you least expect them. And so begins this story. Stick with me, I promise it's one you won't shrug off when the lights go down. We left room 109 believing we'd cleaned the slate, no loose ends, no slip-ups, but life has a way of poking holes in the neatest alibis. A week after that night, I got a summons to the chief's office. He'd heard a rumor someone saw a second shadow at the Royal Crest, someone who wasn't me or Jimmy. My gut sank when I walked in and saw his gray eyes fixed on me like a judge sizing up a jury. "Rayburn," he said, "I'm hearing whispers about that Danette job. You got anything to share?" I felt my pulse spike, remembered the texture of Carl's cold flesh under my glove, the sick weight of Jimmy's gun. I kept my voice steady. "Sir, we staged it as justifiable. 2 witnesses, both frightened. Nothing else." He nodded slowly, then leveled me with a look that said he didn't quite believe a word. From that day on, every routine call felt like walking through a minefield. Then came the whisper campaign in the locker room. Patrol cops who didn't ride through murders started throwing sideways glances, making dark jokes about selective justice. In briefings, detectives exchanged furtive glances when my name came up. I caught snippets. "He's hiding something. Rayburn's got blood on his hands." My partner for that quarter eyed me like I was wearing the scarlet letter. I tried to laugh it off. "Stay calm, Rayburn. Just noise," but some nights I'd lie awake, hearing the mocking chorus in my head. Loyalty to Jimmy had opened the door to suspicion about me. Man, it was crazy how one choice could set off a chain reaction. Meanwhile, Jimmy began changing, too. He stopped answering my calls, ducked out of coffee runs, and when we did meet, his grin was forced, like he was auditioning for a role he didn't want. I confronted him in my backyard one Saturday, the humid air sticky as molasses. He stared at me over the white sleeve of his rolled-up shirt and said, "We're fine, Tom. Just let it go." But his eyes wouldn't meet mine. That's when I felt the first twinge of real fear, for him, for me, for everything we'd built. You know, I still get goosebumps thinking about the way guilt can twist a man's spine. The biggest blow came when the waitress who'd forgotten everything showed up at my door 6 weeks later. Alice was napping in her room, and there I was, sweaty in my undershirt, watching a woman in her 20s clutch a notepad. "Sergeant Rayburn," she said, voice trembling, I remember more now. I saw someone else in the hallway. A guy in a suit." My heart seized. I ushered her in, offered water, anything to calm that buzzing panic in my ears. I coaxed her eyes away from the stained porch step, whispered, "It was the clack of my boots, sweetheart. You thought you saw 2 people, but that was me stepping forward." I guided her back to confusion. She left crying, and I locked the door, convinced that if she called it in, the whole department would collapse like a house of cards. Every drive by the Royal Crest felt worse than the night Jim and I answered that call. The neon sign was still flickering, mocking me with its half-lit, "Y" in Royal. I found myself tailing through back roads, checking my reflection in the rearview mirror, half expecting a blue uniform behind me. My sleep turned to brownouts, micro-sleeps at red lights where I'd jerk awake, hand on the shifter like a lifeline. My wife noticed the lines around my eyes and the way I'd flinch at unexpected knocks. I told her it was arthritis, old cop joints. She called me stubborn. I called it survival. By the end of that summer, I realized the real danger wasn't outside with internal affairs breathing down our necks, it was inside, gnawing at my conscience. Loyalty to Jimmy had morphed into jailer of my own honesty, and I was trapped. The black hole of that night kept expanding, pulling in everything I thought I knew about right and wrong. And that was the moment I understood, covering up a murder doesn't just bury a body, it resurrects doubt, suspicion, and fear for everyone involved. The plan unraveled thread by thread, and I began to see the shape of my own undoing. I still remember the afternoon light slipping through the dusty slats of my garage when I first realized the debt I thought was buried had grown into a beast ready to devour me whole. I'd found that tape weeks earlier, but I'd stalled. Denial is a hell of a drug when you've rewritten your truths so many times. That day, I finally popped it into the ancient VHS player, and as the static cleared, there was Jimmy, laughing at some department picnic, the weight of his secret still nowhere on his shoulders. Then the camera panned to my cold case board, and I saw it, the sticky note I'd slapped over the Dinette file, its corner barely clinging, the words, "Reopen," glaring back at me like a judge's gavel. My heart pounded so loud I heard it in my ears, and I knew I couldn't sit on that truth any longer. I grabbed the tape and dashed across the yard to my back gate, pried it open, and stomped down the concrete path to Jimmy's place. Man, it was crazy how every step felt like sinking sand. He was in his own garage, tinkering with that ancient Mustang engine he adored. The afternoon air rattled with the scent of oil and rust. I threw the door open, and he looked up, grease on his cheek, that old easy grin playing on his lips. "Tom, what's up? You look like you saw a ghost." I held up the tape as if it were a grenade, voice shaking. "Watch this." He set his wrench down, wiping his hands on a rag, and I slid the tape into his player. The familiar hiss filled the silence, then the image of me and him, younger but no less haunted, flickered on the dusty screen. Jimmy's jaw went slack when the camera settled on the sticky note, his name under Carl Dinette, the question of reopening that case. He stood, eyes wild, shouting, "Rayburn, you can't," but I cut him off. I was shaking so hard I couldn't lock eyes. "No more lies," I said. "I'm done covering for you. I either tell Alice the truth or you vanish from her life, forever." His face went ashen, and for a moment the years we'd shared, the blood we'd shed together, seemed to hang between us like a ghost neither of us could ignore. Then he spat out, voice cracking, "She loves me, Tom. You know that. And if this gets out, she'll never forgive you or me." The garage felt like a pressure cooker. The Mustang engine sat cold witness. My throat tightened. I swallowed hard. Will she forgive the truth? I asked, but even as I spoke I knew. He planted his feet, defiance sparking in his eyes. "You owe me," he hissed. And then he lunged for the tape, but I sidestepped, knocking it to the floor where it skidded into a dark corner. For a heartbeat, I thought he'd hit me, or I'd have to hit back. The dust motes danced in the sunlight as if mocking our standoff. My chest burned, 30 years of loyalty warring against 50 years of justice, but I stood my ground. "It's not about debt," I growled. "It's about right and wrong." He laughed then, a ragged, broken sound that echoed off the tool racks. "Right and wrong," he repeated. "You're the one who taught me that it's never black and white." God, he was right. I'd coached him through his first homicide, flinched at his first kill, vouched for him when he stared down a judge. And here he was, the man who saved my life, holding the bullet that killed another. I felt tears sting my eyes, victims, families, my own daughter's laughter at Sunday dinner, all crowding in. Jimmy's shoulders sagged, and I saw it then, the man I loved like a brother, crushed by guilt, too ashamed to fight. My voice softened, "Look at me, Jimmy." He met my eyes, and in that instant I knew neither of us would walk away unchanged. "You're my brother, but I'm her father." The word father felt like a hammer. He dropped his head. Silence thickened. Then, just as the sun sank low, he whispered, "Do what you must." I wanted to die in that moment, to join Carl in that still motel room, but I lifted the tape, brushed the dust off, and tucked it in my jacket. I walked out without looking back, the garage door rattling shut on everything we'd been. And that was the pivot, the moment the past broke loose and I chose truth over loyalty, knowing the fallout would scorch us all. I woke up that morning with the weight of the tape burning a hole in my jacket pocket, the same heaviness I felt back in '73 when I realized Jimmy had crossed a line. I knew what I had to do, no more half-truths, no more paperwork lies. I poured my coffee black, the steam fogging the kitchen window, and rehearsed the words I'd never spoken. "Alice, there's something you deserve to know." She was at the table, nursing a mug of chamomile tea, her eyes still bruised from another long night at the shelter. When I told her Jimmy's real story, I saw her world crack open. I braced for anger, for tears, for the kind of fury that burns through trust, but what I got was silence. She held my gaze, pale and steady, and I realized all at once that the truth was as sharp as any bullet we'd ever investigated. She didn't scream. She didn't accuse. She simply folded her hands, whispered, "Okay, Dad," and walked out of the house before the sun really rose. I sat alone, a ticking clock the only witness, wondering if I'd done the right thing or destroyed the only real home I'd ever known. Days turned into weeks. Alice didn't answer my calls or reply to my letters. I left meals by her door, gifts she'd once loved, a sweater with her favorite color, her old blanket Jimmy had given her at 6, hoping somehow that gesture would bridge the gulf I'd opened. But the silence stretched wider, and with every unanswered knock, the room inside me grew colder. I kept waiting for a confrontation, a moment when we'd stand face to face and she'd let me back in, but it never came. Instead, I learned of Jimmy's death from a neighbor. He'd taken his own life in that same garage where we'd clashed, leaving behind an empty bottle, a note scrawled with regret. The irony wasn't lost on me. He'd saved my life once, I'd saved his from the badge, and in the end, neither of us could save each other from ourselves. I attended his funeral in a gray suit that felt too tight, too formal for the grief I carried. The chapel was dim, the smell of lilies thick in the air. I stood in the back, watching Alice pass by with her head held high, tears tracing pale lines down her cheeks. I wanted to call out, to hold her, to beg forgiveness, but I knew I'd broken something that might never heal. The casket closed, the choir sang, and the world moved on without Jimmy, leaving me with memories too heavy for my 76 years. Retirement had given me time, but it hadn't given me peace. I walk the same streets I once patrolled, nodding to neighbors who don't know my past, sipping coffee at the same diner where Carl Dennett once bragged about his latest score. I see my reflection in the window and recognize the man who traded loyalty for justice, then traded justice for heartache. Sometimes I close my eyes and hear the bullets whistle, the echo in that motel room, the creak of the garage door shutting on my last chance at silence. I've come to accept that some stories don't have neat endings. Truth can fracture the world you built, and forgiveness isn't a right, it's a gift you can't force. My badge hangs behind glass now, a reminder of the lines I crossed. The files are boxed up, the VHS tape locked away where no one will ever play it again. Alice hasn't spoken to me in 12 years, and I doubt she ever will. But I carry her memory every day, a compass pointing toward the justice I once believed I could control. So here I stand, not as a hero, not as a villain, but as a man who learned that the hardest case of all is the one you carry inside. I shared my story because maybe, somewhere out there, someone needs a warning. Cover up one murder, and you might bury your own soul with it. That's how it ended for me. The question now is yours. What would you do if loyalty and truth came crashing through your front door? I carry the weight of those days like a bruise that never quite heals. After Jimmy died and Alice walked away, my world narrowed down to long, quiet mornings in that same kitchen where I broke her heart. The mug of black coffee felt heavier in my hand, each sip a reminder that truth can burn as fiercely as any lie you try to smother. I stopped tinkering with the Mustang engine in my garage. I couldn't face the place where our final showdown played out, so I set up a small workbench indoors and learned to refurbish old clocks. Their steady ticking became my new soundtrack, a relentless beat reminding me that time moves on, whether you want it to or not. I found peace in small routines, walking down to the diner for eggs and grits at dawn, greeting the same waitress who never asked too many questions, feeding the stray cat that showed up on my porch and seemed just as wary of strangers as I'd become. Some days I'd pause by the courthouse steps, memories of evidence bags and cold cases flitting through my mind like dust in the sun. I'd close my eyes, think of Carl Dennett's face, and wonder if maybe, somewhere past all this, forgiveness is possible, even if it's only for yourself. My faith in justice shifted. I used to believe that every wrong could be righted if you followed the rules, dotted your I's, and crossed your T's. Now I know justice lives in the cracked spaces between lines on a report, in the painful conversations you refuse to avoid. I learned that loyalty without accountability is a double-edged sword. It protects the ones you love and wounds the innocent. I learned that truth is more than a statement of facts, it's a commitment to bear whatever fallout comes. At 76, I've slowed down, but I'm no less watchful. I volunteer at the Veterans Center now, sharing stories, carefully edited, of course, about integrity, about the price you pay when you let one lie grow into a forest. And every time a young vet looks me in the eye and thanks me for saying what needs saying, I feel a stitch of hope that my own story matters, that maybe by owning the worst chapter of my life, I help someone else choose better when their own darkness creeps in. I'll never see Alice again, I suspect, but in the hush before midnight, I still talk to her in my head, "Honey, I'm sorry." Those words echo in the garage where I once stood with Jimmy, and in every tick of my old clocks. And in that echo, I find a kind of grace, imperfect, unfinished, but mine. After all those years chasing truth and burying lies, I've come to understand that the hardest verdict is the one you pass on yourself. I used to think justice lived only in courtrooms, penned in neatly typed reports and sealed case files. But real justice is messy. It's the weight you feel in your chest when you choose honesty over loyalty, even if loyalty feels safer. I learned that every choice carves a path, and some paths lead you so far from who you once were that only brutal honesty can guide you home. Covering up Jimmy's crimes saved him for a moment but cost me far more than I ever bargained for: my daughter's trust, a brother's life, and peace of mind that no badge could restore. Now, I carry one simple rule: accountability over comfort. It doesn't always mean telling the world every dark secret you hold, but it does mean facing the fallout of your actions with open eyes and an honest heart. I owe that to the victims, to my family, and to myself. Silence can protect, but it can also suffocate the soul. I've seen how a single lie can sprout roots that strangle everything beautiful you build, and I've felt how long it takes to pry its fingers loose. So if there's one thing I want you to take away from my story, it's this: don't trade your integrity for a moment's peace, because moments pass, but integrity shapes the rest of your life. The truth may break you, it may tear your world apart, but it also lays the groundwork for healing. And sometimes, in those shattered pieces, you find strength you never knew you had. Accountability isn't a punishment, it's the compass that keeps you from losing your way. That's the lesson I've earned the hard way, and it's one I carry with every tick of these little clocks I fix. Time moves on, and it demands honesty in return. After Jimmy's death and my fallout with Alice, the story of Room 109 took on a life of its own behind the precinct walls. Whispers about that Danette cover-up circulated in hushed tones among rookies pouring coffee before their first Code 3 call. I'd hear snippets as I visited old colleagues: "He's the one who bent the rules for friendship," or "Rayburn's the reason I think twice before taking a partner's word at face value." No one ever asked me outright, but the tale became a cautionary legend, a reminder that even the best intentions can derail a career and fracture a life. When I volunteered at the Veteran Center, older detectives would slip in congratulations, softly praising my courage for finally facing the truth, while younger ones listened wide-eyed, scribbling mental notes on where loyalty must end and responsibility begins. It changed how I approached every conversation: no more glossing over gray areas, no more protecting secrets that poison trust. I learned to speak plainly with cadets and lieutenants, sharing that sometimes the hardest arrests you make are the ones inside yourself. On the rare occasions I returned to the Royal Crest site, now remodeled, the neon sign replaced with a subtle marquee, I'd run into new detectives conducting training drills. They'd ask about handling witness intimidation or managing conflicts of interest. I'd lean against the cruiser's hood and tell them, "Remember Rayburn and Kale, one partner's gratitude can cost another man his life. Don't let loyalty blind you to justice." That line became my unofficial closing argument for every debrief. Over the years, I've never covered up another crime. The lesson of 73 carved a permanent line in my code of ethics. When a fellow officer's kid got in trouble, I urged honesty. When a friend in uniform asked for a favor, I weighed consequences first. I watched the precinct embrace tougher oversight, internal affairs protocols tightening, all in the name of preventing stories like mine from repeating. As for Alice, the legend kept her name alive among colleagues more than any case file. She inspired reforms in how departments handle officers' personal ties to investigations. Her absence from my life was the silent chapter that spoke volumes, proof that even the fiercest bonds can't withstand buried truths. So that's what happened next. The story passed from one patrol car to the next, shaping policies and conversations long after I'd hung up my badge. And for me, every day became a test: how to live with the past's echo while forging a future grounded in the hard-won integrity of a man who once paid the ultimate price for silence. You've been with me through every twist of this story, seen how one split-second choice can ripple through decades, changing lives in ways you could never predict. I've laid bare my failures and regrets so you can see that even the most seasoned cop, the man who's seen 1,000 cases, can still be blinded by loyalty. Now, as you close this chapter, ask yourself, when the stakes are highest, what matters more, protecting someone you love or honoring the truth no matter the cost? Maybe you'd stand by a friend, believing you're doing the right thing. Or maybe you'd risk everything to unearth a secret, trusting that honesty can heal even the deepest wounds. There's no easy answer, and that's the point. Life doesn't hand out badges for perfect morality. It tests you in the gray, where every decision demands you weigh hard against justice. So here's what I want to know. If you were in my shoes, staring down that final choice between silence and confession, which path would you take, and why? Let me know in the comments below, because your answer might just help someone else decide where they draw their own line.